What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, Jack Slack, coming at you on Thursday afternoon, Fights Gone By podcast episode 38. And we're still recovering from UFC 211 last weekend, which was a really crackerjack card. It was one that looked great and held up. So plenty to recap, plenty to look forward to this weekend with the Bellator event on the horizon, and a good Bellator event. Well, a good Bellator main event. The Sumo's back on, and it's already great. Won't bother with news today. In fact, my news feed is being filled up with rumours of Conor McGregor saying that he signed the contract and is now waiting on Mayweather. Oh, you know how I feel about that. Well, I wrote the only real book about him on the market, so if he does take that fight, or if that fight does happen, I stand to at least sell a lot of books. But, I just don't care about watching a professional MMA fighter fight a retired boxer. So instead, we'll cut right into the meat of UFC 211. I did say I'd have commentaries up for this one, but unfortunately, technical difficulties fucked me over. I will be doing commentaries going forward as soon as I've fixed the various things that need fixing. Let's start with the barn burner with the controversial ending. Always a good feature to have on a card. This was Eddie Alvarez versus Dustin Poirier. I thought this would be a good fight. Poirier loves a tear up, but a little bit chinny. Eddie loves a tear up, tends to get hurt a lot in his fights. The interesting thing I thought going into this was that Poirier is another southpaw. I did say Poirier doesn't throw straight punches. I would love to see him throw straight punches, but there's very little chance of that. And then he came out looking crisp as anything in this fight. The counter that set Eddie's knees a knocking was the southpaw shoulder roll into the left straight. Eddie was doing the long right hand and falling in behind it again. It was the same sort of opening that he was showing against McGregor. I mean, it's happened in a few of his fights because he likes to go after the body with the right hand and he likes to really dive for the right hand too. So left hook and southpaw left hands can often be a problem for him. But I thought Dustin's counter, the one that really did the hurting, was gorgeous. A southpaw shoulder roll into a left straight as Eddie had fallen forward and was recovering his guard and stance. Southpaw shoulder roll, not as common as an orthodox shoulder roll because it obviously depends on what the other guy's standing in, but open guard shoulder roll less common than a closed guard shoulder roll, and that's just because of how things line up. If you're in a closed guard situation, you put your lead shoulder down the center line. All their right hand has to hit is your back. That's not to say that there aren't great southpaws who've used the shoulder roll very effectively. It's just that it doesn't shut down the options, at least the punching options of the attacker quite as completely as the closed guard shoulder roll does. But a great example of a southpaw shoulder roll is Zab Judah. He used to roll behind that lead shoulder no matter what was coming at him and then come back with the left uppercut or the left straight. Gorgeous counter. Poirier had him wobbled, followed him to the fence, and Eddie Alvarez did his Eddie Alvarez thing. I thought he looked very composed under fire, even though he was absolutely out of it. It was like the work that he did against Dos Anjos. To be honest, I'd love to see Eddie work more on the counter, just generally. But the work he did against Dos Anjos, where Dos Anjos was moving in on him along the fence, that was really crisp. This was not really crisp, but he did eventually clatter Poirier, and the crowd were going nuts at this point, and then he hit him with a couple of knees on the ground, which were illegal. I believe one of them, his knees were up and his hands were down, and the other one, his knee came down. So one of them was, very hard to confuse illegal. My policy generally is just legalise knees to the head on the ground, which we may well be moving towards, because, there was a time when I thought that would be extremely hard to do, to legalise, to push through. But who knows, with the changes they've made recently to the rule, maybe we'll move in that direction to save on confusion. But, that's however long it's been since that rule came in, there's already been 2 cock-ups, related to it. But, we're all looking for a way to make this less confusing, because a knee strike on the ground to the head is no different to a knee strike to the head on the feet. It's not like a soccer kick where you're lining up for days and you run in and punt them in the head. And to be fair, with soccer kicks, there is so much time to see that coming and put something in the way of it, or get back behind your guard. Even if you watched the heyday of Pride soccer kicks, not that many of them, really. Not many fights massively affected by soccer kicks. Only guys who were really outmatched and didn't really know how to deal with them. You know, when people say, oh, I'd love to see this butt-scooting stuff work with soccer kicks and stomps, Shinya Aoki did it. And arguably it was more effective because if a guy throws his leg at you and misses your head or clatters off your head, you know, his leg is then in your guard and you could start entangling it. But we're getting off topic there. Someone asked me if I'd like to see a return of the cage rage rule, the open guard rule, or whatever it was. Basically, after a certain amount of time with one man standing over the other, the referee would say open guard rule or whatever it was, and then stomps and soccer kicks were allowed. ONE FC, I think, tried that. And that was the reason that the Tim Sylvia Andrei Arlovski 4, hotly anticipated, was a no contest rather than a TKO or whatever. The thing is, like, any of these situations, the fighter is relying on someone else telling him what he can do. You know, a lot of the time, if you have their head, you're not going to be able to see whether their hands are flat on the floor or if they've got their fingertips on the floor or whatever. Especially if you're reeling from a punch or whatever. You know, the more rules and complications you add to it, the harder it's going to, well, the more cock-ups we're going to see and the more no contests and disqualifications. But a great fight cut short. They're talking about a rematch. I don't know what's happening with that, but, you know, we'll probably get it. Great to see Eddie, you know, win back the fans. And, well, it was mainly dickheads who were hating on him after the McGregor fight. But, you know, how could you not be a fan of the guy after that? Like, just swinging for the fences when he was completely out of it. And Dustin Poirier looking sharp, which was nice because he looked a little bit sloppier against Michael Johnson and he got caught quite quickly as a result of that. Dustin Poirier looks much better with hair. I looked him up on Fight Finder in the run-up to this fight when I was thinking about writing an article about it, and I didn't even recognise him, the photo that they put up. Handsome dude when he's got the hair and not the beard and bald-headed, like, skinhead look. Then there was Frankie Edgar versus Yair Rodriguez. What, maybe my favourite fight on the card? I really loved this. You know, Rodriguez was coming in off a win over the ghost of BJ Penn, so he hadn't actually fought anyone even near Edgar's level. But, you know, every time he comes up, I've been saying, like, the amount he dances himself onto the cage, the loopy, sloppy nature of his boxing and the reliance on these long, flashy kicks, stuff that could be exploited by a better ring general. And, you know, within a minute of this fight starting, he'd run himself onto the fence and Edgar had pushed him into it. Edgar was masterful in this fight, just looked absolutely brilliant. Another nice example of the... Well, actually, let's just talk about it generally. Edgar was all the way in, all the way out, stood on the end of Rodriguez's reach. Whenever Rodriguez went to kick, Edgar would just step back. And then when he felt nothing was coming, he'd rush in with a couple of punches. When Rodriguez tried to punch, his hands are very rough at the moment. So they, you know, it was easy for Edgar to duck under them. But another sort of sign of inexperience he saw from Rodriguez was immediately going for the guillotine on the cage and just happily falling to his back, holding the guillotine, which he immediately lost. One of the reasons that everyone loves Rodriguez is because he's so aggressive, and even when he gets put on his back, he's constantly attacking. The thing about an aggressive guard, and this comes up every time that we see like a guy with amazing striking, and you're like, he doesn't have the takedown defense, but he's comfortable getting taken down because his guard is that good. The thing is that can totally be smashed out of you. Like, it's, again, ring position. If you crumple a dude's head up against the fence and you keep his body curled up, he can't extend his hips for a triangle or an arm bar, or an overhead sweep. You know, he hit that lovely roulette sweep a while ago. And I think he tried it on Edgar at one point. Certainly Edgar fell forward into his guard as Rodriguez pulled his knees in at one point. But Edgar's head just hit the fence. You know, there was no way he'd get swept overhead. But that was just like Tito Ortiz 101. Put them against the fence and they can't shuffle back. They can't move their hips as well. And you can start smashing their head knowing that it's braced against the cage. Edgar did a great job of stacking up, standing in Rodriguez's guard, getting his hips over his shoulders, you know, keeping him in positions where he couldn't comfortably work, crowding him so that he couldn't up kick. Anytime Rodriguez went to throw up a submission, he was all crumpled up and Edgar would just shuck it off and move past. Actually, watching Edgar in this fight, you know, he had such a size disadvantage. He actually reminded me a lot of Kid Yamamoto's Shuto days. Kid Yamamoto would stand in guys' guards and he'd happily just like rain down full extension punches on their face, just because his height worked well for standing in the guard. Second round, more of the same. Rodriguez immediately tries the leaping in sidekick to the knee, and Edgar just moves back. Exactly what we talked about last week. Edgar takes him down out in the open, but Rodriguez rolls for a knee bar. That was nice. That was showing the difference between how Rodriguez could move when he had momentum and he'd just been taken down in the centre of the octagon, as opposed to when he'd been dropped along the fence and couldn't go anywhere. But Edgar came out and started pounding the eye, which was already swollen. I can't even imagine getting hit in an eye that is that badly swollen. It was pretty hideous, even by the end of the first round. And Rogan was going mental because they'd not put the Answell on his eye at all in the corner, which was just a really strange decision. There was a nice little roll to turtle and then Kimura roll looking for the back and then the armbar from Rodriguez. But, after that it was all Edgar, just smashing from the top. Awesome performance. Stopped at the end of the second round due to the hideous nature of the eye. Frankie Edgar's such a legend. I can comfortably call him one of the best fighters in the history of this sport so far. Regardless of titles, just on ability and his ability to apply that ability, just on ability and being able to apply that ability against almost everyone he fights, with the exception of Jose Aldo, basically. Truly remarkable. I mean, he's 35, but he doesn't seem to be slowing down very much at all, so awesome. Rodriguez, this is just the sort of stuff that happens to young prospects. They run into their first big test, a lot of stuff goes wrong, or, they start getting shown, you can't just throw with reckless abandon, you can't just keep doing crazy shit. You have to think about where you are, what's happening, what this guy likes to do. It's not just about you. So, he'll grow from this and he'll get better. And, in 5-10 years' time, well, maybe not 10, but 5 years' time, he'll certainly be a force in the division. Maia versus Masvidal. Not an awful lot to say about that one, but Masvidal's takedown defense held up as well as expected. Maia being willing to go to the guard proved to be the difference a lot of the time. Grabbing the single, getting sprawled on, posting up on the hand and sitting through to catch the leg and work from half guard and then come up on the single again. It works so well, and it's worked so many times, because it just, for some reason, when guys are in the top of his guard, they stop thinking about it as wrestling, and then when he comes up on the leg, suddenly, they're not in position to fight him off. Brilliant stuff. Masvidal certainly didn't embarrass himself. Demian Maia has been fucked around so much now, definitely deserves his shot. I'll be interested to see how he can work against Woodley, because Andre Galvao, who is one of the greatest grapplers ever, but more known for his top game, really, and his guard passing, he took on, I think it was his last MMA fight. Tyron Woodley may have made him quit MMA, but he took on Woodley in Strike Force, couldn't take him down, and then wouldn't pull guard, so he was just left sort of shooting awkward shots on a guy that he couldn't take down, and eventually got hit hard and knocked out. I think. Can't remember if that was the actual ending, but that was certainly the case. He couldn't get the guy down and he wouldn't pull guard. Whereas Maia's ability to pull guard makes him a multi-dimensional threat even as a one-dimensional fighter. It's pretty cool. JDS versus Miocic we'll do next, because the co-main was the masterclass. Really just, you saw JDS's biggest flaw drawn out by someone who'd already fought him, knew that was a big flaw and had worked for it, and really just improved on their performance from the first time round. The first time round, Stipe would get him to the fence, try and hold him there, and then when he broke off, he'd try and hit him. This time, JDS runs himself onto the fence within the first few seconds. Stipe uses the chance to step in with a big right hand, and as Junior circles out, he'll try and catch him then. Doesn't bother trying to tie him up and hold him. So JDS gets hit with a couple of Stan Hansen lariats on the way out, and that puts him on wobbly legs and ends the match. He was also doing the jab off the cage, and it was that same hole again. He'd throw the jab, land the jab, and Stipe's right hand would come through immediately after the jab over his shoulder and hit him on the chin. It was good to see both men kicking, because both have such boxing-centric stances that they can be knocked out of their stance and hurt quite easily with kicks. JDS hurt Miocic's leg quite badly in the opening. Not a very long fight, just the same flaws in JDS, and Miocic capitalising on it beautifully. I was laughing so much in the forums after this fight. Well, mainly Reddit, because that's where I check. The guys were like, oh, well, Stipe's just good at everything. He's not great at anything. And the same people who are praising Fedor for being a great all-rounder, for some reason that's a flaw with Stipe Miocic. Well, that's just what people are like. The past's always better. But yeah, great to see Stipe level the record, equal the record for title defences at heavyweight. If they give him Derek Lewis or Francis Ngannou next, that should be a fairly easy one, because those guys have not fought very many good fighters. But of course, it's heavyweight, so anything can happen. He could be in a motorcycle accident or something. Anyway, finally, Joanna Jedrzejczyk versus Andrade. Beautiful fight. Joanna Jedrzejczyk. I wrote a huge piece on this at Vice Sports called The Flawless Ringcraft of Joanna Jedrzejczyk or something like that. Go read it. Fight was amazing. Lots of lovely looks from Joanna. The main thing that you noticed was she was constantly circling off, but not cut at a tight angle, not waiting until she hit the fence like JDS. What she'd do was she'd always be beginning to circle out at a 45 backwards, back and to the right, back and to the left, no, back and to the right. But she'd start doing that within the interior black lined octagon, on the canvas. It was really interesting watching that fight. Just count the number of times she starts circling out while within that, because that's what is it? I don't know the exact measurements, but it's got to be 5-6 feet from the actual fence. Start from there and start circling out, as opposed to waiting until you're between. When the opponent is standing on that line and you're between them and the fence, not a great time to start circling out. Because if she did it out in the open, she could retreat and circle out at the same time, which lengthened Andrade's left hand. And meant that Joanna was never actually running into it. She was running past it. I was doing tons of actions with my hands there, but it didn't help at all. Sorry, guys. The jab and the long low kicks were really important, just as Angela Hill showed they would be. Really important that she didn't step deep and try and dig the shin in at very many points. She was kicking on the end of her leg reach. Rogan loves leg reach. But yeah, she was kicking long and into the nearest target. She wasn't stepping deep and trying to punt through the leg, because those are the sort of ones that Andrade can step inside off, Roman Zensov style. We talked about Andrade's tendency to lean back when she got feinted, and also she reaches so far to try and palm the jab. Because it's such a problem for her, and anytime that she's shown any sort of feint, she'll swipe at it. So Joanna basically started looking for the left high kick from the get-go, landed a good few of them, and a lot of them were hard. That's the other thing. Andrade has a head like a fucking cinder block. She was just taking these punches, smiling, walking forward, and the couple of punches that she did connect clean on Joanna, connected on the forehead, which shouldn't do that much damage, but just swelled up enormous. So real hard hitter and can take a beating. I mean, Andrade is going to be limited by not learning to use her physique, the height and reach that she has, and not learning to close the distance properly. She was relying on against people like Angela Hill and Jessica Penne. Well, Jessica Penne just sort of backed herself into the fence. Angela Hill, when she committed to a right hand or a hard low kick or something like that, she'd come close enough that Andrade could beat her in a sprint. But Joanna was having none of that. Joanna was always on the end of her reach and moving away. And just running in with the left hook just isn't going to cut it in that sort of situation. We talked about options that she has. The jab is so important for a shorter fighter. People think reach advantage, can't use the jab, I've got to use swinging hooks. No, it just means that your jab is shorter. That's literally all it means. It's still as useful a punch as ever. Mike Tyson's dipping jab was massively important to him. Watch any Customato fighter for that. And we always talk about the Roberto Duran jab and duck. Jab, flick out the jab, wait, duck in anticipation of the return. And that's how he did most of his good body work. He did a good deal of stuff on the inside, but his best body shots, he had this wide right. And you don't see full right hooks landing to the body that often against top level boxers, because the left elbow is always there. But he'd flick out the jab, duck, and as their jab came back, he'd already be throwing the right hook in under their open elbow. We're always talking about open elbows. It's an important thing in grappling and in striking, because in grappling, it gives you a lot of control. Ryan Hall did a whole DVD series on it, which is a brilliant series you should watch. But in striking, to actually lash out at someone, you have to extend your arm. And anytime that happens, your elbows are away from your ribs, and that opens up some of the best blows in any striking arsenal. The floating ribs are... We talk about, like, vital points or pressure points or targets or whatever, but the ones that you can get to easy are, like, the eyes, stuff on the center line, the solar plexus, the stuff that's under the elbows, like the ribs. They're hard to hit, but if you can catch them clean, you can break a floating rib quite easily. But it's certainly easy to take the air out of someone with a couple of good punches under there. Actually, the armpit is underrated as a place to hit if you can really dig it in. But the floating ribs are just so fragile, and there isn't really enough muscle around them, even on a well-trained abdomen, to mitigate all the damage you can do with a couple of good hooks on an open rib. Anyway, I won't prattle on too long about Joanna, because it was just a textbook performance. Any fighter in the game could learn from watching that. Women's MMA, the standard is generally much lower. It's not been around as long, and the striking is largely fairly poor, but Joanna is someone that anyone can learn from watching. Just masterful ring craft, and always comes in prepared. The other thing that made me laugh was Jessica Andrade. Well, this fight should give you an appreciation for how bloody good Daniel Cormier is, hitting those high crotch pickups and somersaulting guys cleanly onto their backs. He does that routinely. Very rare that his opponents land on their hands, whereas Andrade was doing like the Triple H flapjack, except in pro wrestling they don't put their hands out, whereas she was just throwing Joanna onto her hands. And there's a value to throwing someone onto their hands. You can go after their neck, you can go after the front headlock, but you have to really be planning that and moving ahead of time. Just throwing someone as hard as you can and them landing on their hands miles away from you really doesn't help you. Anyway, great night of fights. Go read the recaps I wrote for Fightland, but they're on Vice Sports. I don't know what's happening with that whole thing. I think they botched the redesign, so we're temporarily on Vice Sports. Let's do some questions. Hi Jack, loving the podcast. I was wondering if you could suggest any strategies or tactics a fighter with slow reflexes can use in their stand-up. I am a beginner who is in mid-40s and sometimes feel a step behind younger people. Any tips would be appreciated. Thanks, Al. I think having said you're a beginner, it takes a while to get your eye in for anything. If you take a month or two off of training, if you get injured, you're going to lose a good deal of your anticipation for things, whether it be grappling or striking. You're going to come back and you're going to be like, well, I would have had that like just before I got injured. But again, like, it's something that reflexes it's not even necessarily that your reflexes are bad. It's just recognizing cues and triggers. It's not an academic thing. You can't tell someone how to recognize a jab coming at them. But if you're dealing with it several times a week, you come to understand instinctively what it looks like. But there are like ways to deal with being slower. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Teddy Atlas. Someone used to talk about making it a muddy track. If you're against a guy who's using pure speed, or has a pure speed edge on you, make it a muddy track so that it's like an off-road race. The answer to speed has always been good timing. It's if you watch someone like Bernard Hopkins or someone like that who's working amazingly in their 40s, performance enhancers and things aside, you'll see them controlling the distance a lot more and really limiting the number of exchanges. You're not going to be able to do like Julio Cesar Chavez, Ricky Hatton, prime pace, 100 punches around or whatever. At age 40, that's the sort of stuff for like a 25-year-old athlete who has spent his entire life training towards that. So using distance and trying to use your feet to dictate when they can step in with their hands. Using the old window, the mummy-style guard, that often helps, having your hands out in front of you, creating a window that they have to punch through. Or around, and if they're punching around, it's less of a clean motion than if they're punching straight, and they're having to work on a curved line, so you've got a little bit more time to react, get your shoulders up, get down behind your guard, move your head, whatever. Just start thinking about it like, what can I do to avoid this guy using his speed as much? Make it less of a factor. Make it so that when he's stepping in, you're timing his step as opposed to timing, standing close to him and trying to time his hands. Just some ideas, but like there's good advice is always to look at some of the 40-year-old athletes. Obviously, a lot of them are incredible physical specimens, and a lot of them are using stuff. But even then, when they're working against much younger guys, they have to fight to the strengths of their body. You know, they can't fight like 25-year-old men, even if they're roided to the eyeballs and 40-something. Right, so the important thing happening this weekend is Bellator London, which I was considering going to at one point, but decided not to. Couple of good fights on this one, and I mean that literally. Liam McGeary versus Linton Vassell, that's a fun fight. And then the main event is Paul Daley versus Rory McDonald. That's an awesome fight. Kimbo Slice Jr. is on the card, and we're in London, so not a proper commission. So far, so standard. Now, Liam McGeary is a damn fun fighter to watch. If you've never seen a Liam McGeary fight, it's a really tall guy throwing awkward strikes, and then if he gets taken down, he's throwing up the weirdest submissions you've ever seen. He reverse triangled Tito Ortiz. His fight with Manny Newton was just a clinic in bizarre submission attempts. You know, he'll have his guard passed, and then from side control, he'll grab the opponent's crossface hand, stretch it over his head, and then across their back insert a hook across so that he's got a crucifix, but from underneath. Really cool. And then uses that to attack triangles and stuff. He was hitting Kimuras from the bottom and all sorts of stuff in that fight. Great fight, if you haven't seen that. Bellator let Emmanuel Newton go, which is a really strange decision because he's a very fun fighter and he makes their light heavyweight division a lot more interesting. He is also the last person to finish Linton Vassell, who's the guy that McGeary's fighting. If you saw McGeary's last fight, it was... they switched the opponent about 3 times, and then he ended up fighting Brett McDermott, got dropped with a jab in the very first few seconds, but then went on to take this guy apart, just bloodied his nose, knocked him down with a knee, got the doctor's stoppage a minute into the second round. Bit of a tune-up after the manhandling that Phil Davies gave him. But up until that Davis fight, McGeary was undefeated as a professional, and he looked really impressive in his 2 bouts against sort of real opponents, which were Tito Ortiz and Emmanuel Newton. Obviously, Tito Ortiz very much old and crocked at this point, but Manny Newton fair game, I feel. Linton Vassell is coming off a loss to Muhammad Al-Lawal at Bellator Dynamite during that tournament. But he rebounded with a victory over Emmanuel Newton, which was revenge for the rear naked choke loss in 2014. And just recently he beat Francis Carmont, in a fight that I don't remember seeing. But it was apparently on the Chandler Henderson card. Linton Vassell, very fun grappler. Obviously a little bit more trouble when he fights someone like... Mola Wall, who's going to be able to control the grappling a bit more, or at least the stand-up portion of it. Liam McGeary's takedown defense never looked that stellar, so we could be in for a ground battle here, but both men sort of working on their striking, not really their thing. I mean, I know Liam McGeary loves a good tear-up, but he is very loose with his form. You know, got dropped with that jab mainly because his right hand is always down by his nipples while he's jabbing. He's 6'6", not quite sure on his reach, but he's a tall guy and can easily get away with jabbing with this hand down most of the time. But if guys start looking for that and realise it's there... But of course, that's just an appetizer. The real reason everyone wants to watch this is because we've got Rory McDonald versus Paul Daley. This is interesting for a number of reasons, because it was a match that you wouldn't think was possible until very recently. Rory McDonald, top welterweight in the world, top welterweight in the UFC. You know, he manhandled Tyron Woodley. If he is not crocked by his last couple of crushing defeats, or not really crushing the second one, but the last couple of defeats have been hard on him. But if he's not broken as a fighter, he's definitely got the skills to manhandle Tyron Woodley again. If you didn't see that fight, Woodley he stands on the fence waiting to shoot in, as he often does, the old Dagestani backstep. Where Stephen Thompson was very cautious and didn't like stepping in on him on the fence, Rory McDonald is comfortable enough stuffing takedowns that he just went in, punted Woodley's body, and then would either stuff the takedown, hit him with an elbow, or go back, roll with the punches behind his lead shoulder, and counter with punches of his own. He really just took him apart in that fight, pushed him to the fence, hit him in the body, backstepped, countered, over and over again. And this is like one of those things that people can't seem to understand, that there are different styles, that do different things. Stephen Thompson did bamboozle Rory MacDonald in their fight, but Stephen Thompson struggled with Tyron, with the exact style that Tyron Woodley was trying to use against Rory MacDonald. Against the bigger punchers, Rory really does better with his kicks. Really loves the kick with the ball of the foot to the body, which I love, so he's a boy in that regard. Very good body kicks just generally. You saw those make a massive difference against Maia. Maia took him down, mounted him in the first round, but every time Rory got back up, he'd just keep the pace on, and then he landed a couple of really good body kicks, and Maia just sort of wilted over the distance. That was only a 3-round fight. Could have really done with 5 rounds between those two, but it is what it is. But the reason this is so interesting is that Paul Daley has essentially been banned from the UFC for life. Very good fighter, very good. Well, one of the better fighters that England's produced. And he had a fairly good UFC career. How long was he in there for? Oh, well, he had two wins, 1 loss, and then he was gone. But he knocked out Martin Kampmann, knocked out Dustin Hazlett, the old hazelnut. Loved that dude, McLovin. But then he met Josh Koscheck, and Josh Koscheck got all up in his face, smack talked him, and then held him down basically. And then when Daley missed an illegal knee on the ground, Koscheck milked it for all it was worth. Koscheck's just not a very nice dude, not a very likable dude at least. But Daley let that get to him and tried to sucker punch him. Hasn't done all that much else terrible stuff, but that was enough to get him banned essentially for life from the UFC, even after Dana White came out and said that when he was ringside at that fight with Nick Diaz, it was one of the best he'd ever seen. But they stuck to their guns on that, which is something they don't normally do. So you got Paul Daley, who has since 2010 been outside the UFC and just knocking people out. Like, how many has he done? 12 knockouts in that time. And 1 submission by elbow. I don't remember that fight, but that sounds funny. There's a lot of questionable names on there, but he's beaten Jorge Masvidal, starched Scott Smith with a retreating, pivoting check hook, which left him face down. Absolutely stunning knockout. Had that amazing fight with Nick Diaz, fought Tyron Woodley, lost a decision over 3 rounds. Got boxed up by Kazuo Misaki in the best fight of Misaki's career, Misaki's welterweight debut, and then immediately after the fight, Misaki retired. That was just one of those ones that you were like, Jesus, I wish I'd seen that guy do some more. Very rare to see a guy go out at the top of his game, but like Misaki and Masato, the kickboxer, did that too. But otherwise, not a huge number of names on this list. Fought Douglas Lima a few months ago, July 2016, and Lima did a beautiful job of timing Daley's left hook and cutting a tighter one inside. Because Daley has a wicked left hook, it's very fast, but it is quite loopy, and he does load it up. So every time he squared his hips, Lima cracked him with the left hook, and it worked wonderfully. But most recently, he fought Brennan Ward, who is a respectable up-and-coming guy. And Daley just laid him out, jumping knee to the face, starched, stiff as a board. Nasty stuff. But the interesting thing in this fight, of course, is that Daley has had 6-7 years, to round out his game, get better as a grappler. You occasionally see him omoplattering people and stuff like that. I think he did a rolling omoplatter, defending a single leg once. But he's really been working on his takedown defense a lot, and we only really got to see him in against Josh Koscheck and Tyron Woodley later on, but it'd be really interesting to see him in against another top grappler in MMA. The other thing about Paul Daley is that he has all the tools. He's explosive when he's throwing right hands and kicks and knees, but he does tend to fall back on just the left hook, and when he starts doing that, he gets very predictable. And that was really the case against Lima, but then against Brendan Ward, he came out looking a bit more varied. I mean, the fight didn't last very long; it was over in 2.5 minutes, but at least it looked like he had acknowledged that he had to do something more than just throw the left hook, even though that's his money punch. Can't really tell you too much about game plans for this one. I think, Rory definitely at an advantage if he sticks to his kicks. Very hard kicker, very effective kicker. Uses his boxing defensively and then looks for the takedowns, or at least mashes Daley against the fence and uses his strength there. Daley, I would be fascinated to see if he can stay up. If he can, he can certainly make Rory's night very hard. And this would be easily the biggest win of Daley's career, and it would make a case for him being like a top 10 welterweight in the world. Certainly we're at a point where the top end of the Bellator welterweight division is, would look completely fine in the welterweight top 10 of the UFC. Same with light heavyweight now, actually. Bellator is catching the UFC up mainly through the UFC's own actions. So that's going down on Friday evening. Should be terrific fun. But I believe it's on tape delay in the UK. They were saying that Channel 5 is getting it an hour late, which just pissed everyone off because, people like to watch sports live, especially if it's a local fighter on a local card. But that's Bellator. Even when they do something right, they manage to botch it. No, I hope this goes well, and I hope we get to see more of these fights, high-level fighters meeting each other in the main event of Bellator. It's not right burying guys like Lima, or whoever it is underneath Fedor versus Mitrione and stuff like that. Or Ken Shamrock versus Hoist 4. Anyway, what else is going on this weekend? The Sumo is back on, and it's the bomb. It is the May Basho. And on the first few days, all the Yokozuna looked really shaky. Kiseno Sato lost twice already. Hakuho hasn't lost yet, but is looking a little bit shaky. I believe Kakeru's lost once. Terunofuji has lost a couple, but then carried a guy out of the ring, so that was pretty cool. In fact, Terunofuji, who is a man mountain, I always mention that, he's like 6'3" and 400 pounds, and can lift Grown Rikishi out of the ring routinely. He was pushed out on, I think it was day one, and I've been talking about this for a little while, like, why does there have to be the drop from the edge of the dojo to the floor, and why is there just like nothing between the spectators and the ring? And I know that's tradition, you're never going to change that, but last time Kiseno Sato fell on his shoulder by tripping over the edge of the ring as he was pushed out, and separated it or whatever. This time Terunofuji gets thrown out, and Kiseno Sato sat by the side, and he lands on Kiseno Sato's ankle and injures Kiseno Sato when Kiseno Sato wasn't even wrestling. Incredible. But there was a really good fight between Kiseno Sato and Choyo no something. I can't remember his name, but it was 2 days ago, I think, or at least yesterday. This guy came out so aggressive, almost forced Kiseno Sato out. And Kiseno Sato had like 1 foot on the rope at the edge of the dojo and the other off the ground as he's almost being pushed out. And he turns it around and throws the guy. It's absolutely brilliant. The guy is astonishing, Kiseno Sato. And he's just sort of been overlooked. Well, I certainly overlooked him because he wasn't a Yokozuna and he hadn't won the big tournaments until recently. If you want to learn more about sumo, check out the articles on Fightland. We did one about Kotosha Giku, we did one about Kiseno Sato, and we did one called Sumo, the Art of 6-Second Fighting or something like that. Really interesting seeing what is working each basho. Kotosha Giku, who does the bumpity bump, the little frog bounce, puts his belly against the guy and jumps them out. He just can't get anything going this basho. Like, guys are just smashing him off. Takayasu is looking amazing. I think he's undefeated at the moment in this basho. Guys charge in on him and he just smashes into them and they like rebound from him. It's really cool. And a lot of what's it called, Oshidashi, whatever. Teppu, I don't remember, but the palm strikes where the arm, you like raise one arm behind you and push with one, and then they switch places. That's really working well this basho for some reason. Not a lot of belt grip stuff. Hakuho is sort of like the main throw guy in the basho at the moment. He's always looking for that, what's it called, a watanagi? Basically grip on the belt, and then he turns them down by the belt grip. Belt grip I'm playing a lot with at the moment. Didn't used to do it that much, but ever since BJJ Scout put up his last study, I've been obsessed with belt gripping, taking the overhook and gripping the belt like it's a mawashi. But not great if you're going to go and train no-gi the next day and you're like, oh shit, I've been training with a mediocre position and getting by on grabbing guys by the back of the belt. Anyway, apologies for no commentaries this week, but I will be putting out the Patreon episode this weekend. We're going to be talking Jack Sharkey, Max Schmeling, Primo Carnero, a little bit of Max Baer, and then I think I'm going to take a step away from the heavyweight title history for one episode. I've got an idea of something I'd like to do about MMA history, which should be quite fun. One of my all-time favourites, and dude's got a fascinating story, so we'll see how that goes. Anyway, sign up to the Patreon to support your boy Jack. Send your emails to fightscorebypodcast@gmail.com, and I'll catch you next week. Cheers.